listening to Right Off the Bus.
All right, so our fourth guest on Under the Radar needs a little introduction, but nevertheless, he is the lead staff reporter for MMA Junkie. He's the host of the MMA Roadshow, one of the most in-depth mixed martial arts podcasts in the world. He's a staple of any UFC press conference. He is the great John Morgan. Thank you for coming on the show, John. It's great to have you.
Bro, it's worth it just for that introduction right there, man. You laid that out well, man. I'm feeling good about myself right now. I might have to do this show all the time.
You're welcome anytime.
Well, we know you weren't always in this profession. So when did you get first get into sports journalism, and how did you end up in that field?
Yeah, it's funny, man. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a professional athlete, right? I mean, I just love playing sports. It was baseball, soccer, basketball. I loved it. But you come to the realization pretty quick that professional sports is probably not going to be the way for you to make a living. But I still want to be involved, and I liked writing, and I liked telling stories, and so I was like, man, I wanted to be a sports writer. Now that's. You got to remember, I'm kind of an old man at 42 years old. So back in the day, you could actually just be a writer. Now you can't do that anymore, right? You gotta do video, you gotta do podcasts, you gotta do it all. But I just wanted to be a sports writer, and so that's what started me down the field. And as it turns out, man, I just happen to be passionate about mixed martial arts as well. And it wasn't, when I was first getting into it. It wasn't an industry, you know what I mean? It was a spectacle back in the mid 90s, but it grew into something and it just worked out perfect. That I had been following the sport from the beginning. The first UFC I ever went to was UFC 16, if you can believe that. Wow. So, I'd been in on kind of the ground floor, so to speak. So when I was able to kind of marry those two passions together of wanting to be a sports reporter and also mixed martial arts, it was like, boom, there it is. And let's go chase it, and now I've been doing this full time for about 15 years and man, love it. Love every bit of it.
Can you talk about how that love of MMA started? Because obviously you had the love of journalism and sports writing, but why was it mixed martial arts that grabbed your attention? And of course, like you said, you kind of came up at the same time as it in the mid 90s, but how did that love of MMA start?
Yeah, it's funny, right? So when I was a little kid, right, like I liked pro wrestling, like Saturday Night's Main Event, like Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Savage and all that, and then I think I was about 8 or 9 years old and I realized it was fake. And I was like, well, damn it, like I thought this was the greatest, But so that kind of passion for that combat had already been, instilled in me. And then, just so I drifted away from it. Once I figured out it was fake, my passion was all gone for it. And so I didn't really have anything, but through a chance encounter, it was crazy. I was about 12 or 13 years old, and a friend of a family friend was opening a kickboxing gym in Dallas where I grew up. And that friend happened to be Guy Mezger, who would go on to fight in the UFC later on. But at the kickboxing gym opening, he had a tape of Muay Thai fights playing from Thailand, old VHS tapes. And it was the first time I'd ever seen a Muay Thai fight. And I was like, this is what a real fight looks like. Like, this is insane. Like, I love this. And so I was like, man, Muay Thai like got me into it. And then that just kind of reignited this passion for me for martial arts. I mean, I think they're legit badasses, right? Like, it's the ultimate sport, right? It's one-on-one, man-on-man competition, and so, that kind of fueled that passion. And then, started learning. Guy Mezger went to the UFC, started seeing the VHS tapes at Blockbuster and all that path. And it just led to MMA. And for me, it's still, I think the competition aspect of it is amazing. It's the simplest competition there is, right? You know what I mean? It's just, like, as Dana likes to say, it's in our DNA, right? Like, we've been doing this forever, but also, man, once you get to know the people involved in it, man, just quality human beings, man, men and women across the board. I think the sacrifice that it takes to be successful in the sport is so great, that they're just great people. And I enjoy being able to kind of help tell their stories, help maybe shine a light on who they are.
That's fantastic. And just following up on that real quick, have you ever trained for MMA? Have you ever sparred? Like, what is your experience actually fighting? Just because it is the craziest thing out there.
So here's the thing too, and I think this is one reason like I have so much respect for him. So yeah, I used to train a lot. I need to get back in the gym and train again, man. I haven't trained. I take my son to training, but we haven't been since March, because of COVID and everything. So I'm anxious to get back to that. But yeah, so I used to train a lot, right? I mean, I was training 4 or 5 days a week at the Lions Den, Dallas. Which was Guy Mezger's gym, and the Trey Telligman was there, and Pete Williams, and Mikey Bowles, and all these people, right? So but I never wanted to compete, man. I was like, this is fun. I love doing this. I love learning it. I love, the practice of it. But there was never a part of me that's like, and now I got to go test myself in a cage. You know what I mean? So I think that's one reason I think I have so much respect for these athletes too. Because look, it does take a certain level of crazy to get in there and say, like, I am going to lock myself in a steel cage with another professionally trained human being who is hell bent on doing physical damage to me. You know what I mean? So I was always like, dude, what if I break an arm or something? Like, how am I like, I was waiting tables at the time, I mean, like, how am I going to support myself? So I was like, nope, I'm good with we can spar, we can roll, we can train. That's enough for me.
I don't blame you there. Like you said, it really does take a special kind of person to want to get in the octagon and do that kind of work and take that kind of beating. And the next question we have, obviously the outlet that you work for, MMA Junkie, it's one of the most prominent news outlets for mixed martial arts now. And I mean, can you talk about how you started with them and now what it's like to be a lead staff reporter, doing your podcast and everything else that you're doing over there?
Yeah, you know what? It's crazy, man. It was a real situation of right place, right time. So I wanted to be in sports journalism, but I put myself through school in the restaurant business, as I mentioned. And I ended up when I got done with school, I got a job as a manager there. Basically, I was offered a restaurant management job for $50,000, or I was offered a newspaper job for $25,000, and I was like, the 50 sounds a little bit better. Let's go do that. So I did restaurant management for years and was successful at it, man. And I enjoyed, and to be honest with you, I enjoyed the hospitality industry as well. And was a general manager of a restaurant. Had like 100 people working for me, a lot of responsibility, good salary, stock options, 401k, insurance, all that good stuff. But it got to a point where I was like, wait a minute, this is good and I'm making a living. I don't hate it, but this is not what I wanted to do. You know what I mean? I don't want to wake up and be 50 years old and think back like, damn, what could have been? Like, what if I'd have chased it? And so, as it turns out, I decided I want to kind of get back into writing and that sort of thing. And I used to go to MMA Weekly a lot. That was like, I was involved in the forums there, and that was my website of choice, basically, MMA Weekly. And in there, Tag Radio, which is now MMA Junkie Radio, is Trig and Gorgeous George. They posted in a forum. They were looking for somebody to help recap their interviews and write them up for MMA Junkie. I didn't even know what MMA Junkie was at the time. And I was like, hey, listen, I reached out to him. I was like, listen, my name's John, I haven't done anything like this before, but I went to school for it. I'd like to do this. Give me a shot. So anyway, long story short, they gave me the shot. And I ended up, Dan Stupp, the founder of MMA Junkie, he liked the work and he's like, yeah, this kid's good. Let's use him. Kid, I was like 26 at the time, but anyway, he's like, let's use him, And so, so that's how it started. And then MMA Junkie was growing. This was like 2006 and they were looking to hire somebody. And so I was, he brought me on part-time basically, and it worked out great because at the time I was in the restaurant business. I grew up in Dallas, but I had moved to Dayton, Ohio. That's where I was positioned at the time, working in a restaurant there, and he lived in Cincinnati. So, it was like thinking about hiring. We were an hour down the road from each other, and so we got together, and he was like, man, let's move forward. So anyway, free work went to part-time work eventually went to full-time work, and then eventually I moved out here to Las Vegas in like 2008. So very, very fortunate, man. I feel like just right place, right time. I mean, I feel like I've worked my tail off afterwards to keep it going, but I really do feel fortunate that, it's kind of right place, right time for me to get that opportunity.
That's great. And you took that chance too. And I mean, now you're at most, if not all, UFC press conferences. And now you're kind of the iconic voice of any UFC press conference. I know you said UFC 16 was your first event. Was that your first UFC press conference, or do you remember your first major UFC press conference that you attended?
Yeah, that was just me as a fan. You know what I mean? That was just me.
Okay.
That was me at, I want to say like 19 years old. I think it was my 19th or 20th birthday. It was in Pontchartrain, Louisiana, which is New Orleans, basically. I set front row cage side for $50, man. Like, you can't even get in the door for $50 anymore, So it's crazy. I can't remember my first press conference. I guess it would have been probably like 2007, probably. Yeah, like late 2006, early 2007. I want to say probably like late UFC 60s, early 70s. It was a little different because we were definitely didn't go to as many as I do now. Like, I mean, there just weren't that many back then. You know what I mean? There were like 8 to 10 shows a year at most. I remember like the first time we went and the first time that I covered a show for MMA Junkie, because Dan was the founder. He was the one doing all the event coverage in the beginning. He was handling everything. But I remember the first time he sent me to a show, we covered it together, and I was like, of course I wanted to cover the live events. Who doesn't, And I remember telling him like, hey man, I just want to let you know, like, I'd like to do more of these. And I remember him saying like, don't worry, there'll be plenty more in the future. And like, man, was he right? You know what I mean? Now they're like 40 a year, and that's just UFC. Then you got Bellator and PFL and everything else. So yeah, it's been crazy to see this thing explode.
And how did you go from, just being an MMA reporter covering the live events to now you're the guy who's always got the first questions? I mean, everyone I listen to, I hear your voice first. No questions asked.
Yeah, it's funny, man. It's kind of become tradition at this point more than anything else. But yeah, now everything's in Vegas. I'm at every show. But once we started picking up and going to a lot of shows, basically it started out as kind of a mechanical thing. It's kind of silly how it started. Like, basically, I would kind of always ask for the first question anyway. Like, that's what I'm there for. You know what I mean? Like, give me the mic first or whatever. But there would always be this weird, at press conferences, there would be this weird moment where Dana White would get up there and be like, hey, we're glad to be here, and it's going to be a great show. Who's got the first question? And we would all raise our hands. And then, PR would be trying to move around and get the microphone to us and pass it down. And there were a couple times where Dana was like, what? Nobody has a question? There's no questions? It's like, no, wait, we do. We're just trying to get a mic, And so Dave Schaller, who was a longtime PR head, he now works for the Philadelphia 76ers. I remember he just asked, he's like, hey man, it was just this weird pause. He's like, we know you're going to want to ask a question anyway. Do you just want to start with the microphone? So that way, when he says who's got the first question, you can just go. That way we don't have that pause. And I was like, yeah, I don't mind doing that. Let's do that. And then, the next press conference is like, hey, that worked out really well last time. Do you mind doing that again? It's like, yeah, I'll do that. You know what I mean? And finally, it's just now like the sound guy just comes up to me. He's like, I'm assuming you have the first question, right? Like, yeah, it gives me the mic. So it's kind of just become, I think, tradition at this point. Like, everybody seems like everybody in the media is okay with it. Maybe they hate my guts and don't tell me about it. But yeah, it seems like everybody's cool with it.
That's awesome. There's no way they're hating on you, John. That's fantastic. So, you've obviously been with the UFC for a while now, following it, and like you said, moving up with your career through it. So can you talk about what it's been like to be alongside the UFC, watching this just exponential growth? Especially the last decade, you've been there for so many of the biggest moments. Can you talk about the growth of the sport and just being there and watching the sport grow and being there for some of these massive, massive fights?
Yeah, it's been unbelievable, man. You think about it, like when I started, it was like where we still had to explain to people that it was a legitimate sport. You think about, like, I don't feel like we have to worry about that anymore, where people, like, there was a time when it's not actually a fight to the death. You know what I mean? It's not actually, people thought it was like blood sport or whatever, so it's been crazy, the acceptance. I think, getting on Fox was huge, getting on network television. I think that was massive. And of course, ESPN's just going to keep growing that, the huge platform that they are. So it's been cool to see that kind of acceptance. And you're also seeing now, I think, a generation of people who grew up with this thing, who always saw it there. You know what I mean? So to them, it's just normal. And that wasn't the case for a long time. You'd be on a plane somewhere, hey, what do you do for a living? You start to explain, and people are just like, what? You cover that barbaric? Like, it's like, it's not that barbaric. Like, it's actually, there's a lot of rules, and, it's actually safer than boxing. And, it's this and that. I feel like that's all gone. You don't have to explain that anymore. It's so much more mainstream acceptance. So I think that's been fantastic to see. And now people know, people know what the sport is, and they know what it's about. And I think they have a lot more respect for the athletes than maybe they did at one point in time.
Well, I will say, unfortunately, my mom still thinks it's totally barbaric and still doesn't understand. I'm watching a fight or trying to show one of my brothers a highlight, and she's like, that is just messed up. That should be illegal. And I'm like, yeah, you don't understand what's going on.
I'll tell you what's funny. So when I started dating my wife, we started dating in like 2008. I remember telling her, I was like, she didn't know anything. She grew up in Mexico, and she wasn't familiar with MMA. And I was like, hey, look, this is kind of a big part of my life. And, it was getting bigger. I was like, you don't necessarily need to love this, but you should probably know like what it is or whatever, So I started showing it to her a little bit, and she's like, oh yeah, it's cool. I like it, And I remember I was like, oh, you know what? You've never seen the first UFC. I was like, let's watch the first UFC. I popped in the DVD, and I was like, holy crap, this was violent. I'm like, what was it about this that drew me to this? Like, this stuff is nuts. And, the first fight, you got Gerard Godot kicking Taylor Tuli's tooth through the cage. I was like, Jesus. So it's kind of funny that even me, like it kind of was barbaric back in the day, but now, obviously it's evolved so much, and the quality of athletes that partake in it, and the quality of people that they are too. I think that's that's a great thing about it too, man. I really do feel like martial arts teaches you a certain level of discipline and respect, and I think that man, you end up with this humility that comes from, like when you have a bad day, you get your ass kicked in front of thousands of people. You know what I mean? I think that leads to you being humble, in a lot of ways. So yeah, honored to cover these athletes.
I think that's very well said. Absolutely. And I know there's obviously been a million spectacular moments that you probably remember so vividly, but are there any favorite moments you can think of from any UFC press conferences or any of the hundreds of interviews that you've done that really stand out and you could just say, that was fantastic. That was a really cool moment for me?
Yeah, it's funny. The press conferences kind of roll together because I'm just there like doing my job, and so like I forget to kind of step back and enjoy. But what's funny is it dawned on me, and I was like, I got to start paying more attention to stuff like this. Like, you take Jorge Masvidal, like the super necessary thing, right? Like that was an answer to my question. Now I don't feel like I partook in that or created that, but I do laugh because necessary is not a word that I use very often in everyday life. And I don't know why that's the one that came out of my mouth, but was that necessary? Super necessary. Now we got a catchphrase, you know what I mean? So it's kind of funny, man. There's so many things that have happened that kind of become like iconic moments that it is weird. I'm like, I took part in that. Now, again, I'm not trying to say like I deserve any credit for it. Like it's the athlete, but it is kind of funny to do that. But the fights are the things that stand out to me for sure, man. That's what really stands out to me, because those moments, especially, not that the fights haven't been great without crowds. I mean, in some ways, like they've been unique, right? Like we can hear certain things that we didn't used to hear, as far as like the weight of the blows. We can hear the coaches talking. And so it's a different experience. But man, there is nothing like 18,000 people buzzing, and it creates a special environment. I remember, I think about like Jose Aldo, jumping out of the cage and running into the crowd and the chaos that created. I think about like, man, this was crazy. I remember when being in Brazil and Nogueira knocked out Schaub and looking around, and there's people crying, literally crying, because Nogueira is such like a beloved hero there. So to see him get a knockout win over this young, hungry competitor, I mean, they're literally in tears. That's amazing. The stadium shows have been amazing. GSP fights in Montreal, the Bell Center, that building, it's built for hockey, and so it's like the crowd is like right on top. It's built almost vertically. It's like the limits of how steep it can be, and the crowd's right. So the volume is so loud, and obviously GSP was a national hero. So yeah, man, getting to go to Japan and hearing some of the the quiet crowds, right, where it's but they're so cool. They're like clapping for guard passes and stuff like that. It's so cool. So yeah, it's the fights certainly that stand out as the iconic moments. Yeah.
And what was the you mentioned having fans back. What was the experience like having fans back at the most recent stint at Fight Island?
A little weird, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's been so long.
Yeah, dude, it's funny, man. You don't realize like how much this has affected us, right? Like, the first time I was in an airport and there were a lot of people, like I had a little bit of like kind of a panic attack, if I'm being 100% honest, man. It's just I'm not used to being around all the people anymore. And it's so weird how fast we've changed, right? Because I mean, that's only like 10 months ago that all this stuff really started happening. But it's weird how you're not used to being in a crowded place anymore. You're not used to being around all those people anymore. So, but it was good, man. Just having those cheers back. I do commentary on UFC Fight Pass for Cage Fury Fighting Championships, and we had a couple shows at the end of the year where it was only 100 people, but it was kind of a small venue, and man, just the energy that they bring to it, hearing it. So, yeah, it was weird. Like I said, in Abu Dhabi Fight Island, like, all the people that came in had to be tested. They had to be wearing a face mask at all times. There was like plexiglass like surrounding the entire floor area. So the stand, the people were in the stands, but there were no fans on the floor. So, I mean, they all had to come in a separate entrance and all that. So, I mean, it was all done very safely. But it was weird to have, 2,000 people in there, screaming again. But it adds to it. It really, really does. Especially the big fights. I always say like the prelim fights where there's not that big of a crowd anyway. It's not that bad, it's kind of, but man, when you talk about like these title fights, you know what I mean? Like big championship moments, you know, somebody achieves their dream for the first time and, you know, they want to jump up and soak in that adulation, you know what I mean? It's not there. You know, I think of, you know, right before the pandemic really hit, we had that amazing Zhang Weili, Ioana and Jacek fight, right? And that fight would have been, you know, entertaining as hell no matter what, right? But the crowd, man, the buzz that was going on after every round, and even at the end, like there's a literal buzz in the arena because they're like, "Who won? I don't know. You think she? Well, that was amazing," you know. And it was crazy. So it adds so much to it. So, man, I'm hoping that this, you know, we get this vaccine rolled out and we can get back to it. You know, I keep hearing maybe by the end of the year we'll be back to full crowds. We'll see. I mean, I'm thankful that we're doing events. You know, kudos to the UFC for driving forward, but man, I'm looking forward to when we can be in a big arena again.
You've been to Fight Island now in Abu Dhabi several times. Would you be able to talk about that experience a little bit and, you know, maybe how it's changed from the beginning to obviously the most recent one with fans?
Yeah, it's crazy, man. I was thinking about that. You know, if you'd ever told me at the beginning of 2020 that I would spend like 10 weeks in Abu Dhabi, you know, over the next 6 months or whatever, like, well, you're crazy, man. But yeah, no, it's interesting. This last one, so we did a 3-week span, and then we did 5 weeks, and this last one was 2 weeks. The 5 weeks was a long time, man, and it was you know, it was great over there. I mean, Abu Dhabi is amazing, and you know, the hotel that they have us in is fantastic, and there's some good restaurants, and I mean, there's stuff to keep you busy. But 5 weeks is a long time to be away from, like, you know, I have a wife and, like I said, a son as well, and you're on an exact opposite time zone, so it's like a 12-hour difference from Vegas. So it's like you're waking up, they're going to sleep, and vice versa, and so it's hard to connect. So it was tough. But the first one was crazy. Like the first one was amazing, man, and it felt, you know, as much as I don't want to be covering pandemic related stuff, you know, I wish it never had happened, but being a part of that, like really covering something that's a part of history, you know what I mean? That is really something amazing. You know, there was a documentary on Fight Pass, or no, on ESPN Plus, I should say, called Fight Island Unclassified, or Declassified, I should say. Anyway, it's a 4-part series. It's good. It shows a lot of behind the scenes stuff, and it was so crazy to you know, when you fly over there, and it was weird, man. We got in like late at night. I remember pulling up to the hotel, and like all these people are wearing like hazmat gear and stuff, and they're spraying our bags down with disinfectant. And it was like, man, this was like a movie. It was so weird, you know. And by now they've kind of dialed it back a little bit. You know, it's a little bit less. It's still a bubble, but this last one was tough because before, you know, we had like this whole like safe zone area that we could walk around, and there was a beach we could go to. Now, because they're kind of open for business again, the safe zone was just our hotel, the fighter hotel, and the arena. So you couldn't even like walk around outside. You had to be in a bus. You know, there was like security that wouldn't let you outside. So it was it was a little less entertaining. There was less stuff to do, but you know, but it's necessary, man. I mean, and look, I think we're going to go back in the summertime probably. And we may have to go back before then, depending on, you know, what travel restrictions look like and stuff. I mean, it's a necessary evil, unfortunately. I mean, Abu Dhabi is great. I look forward to going back to Abu Dhabi when like it's just open and we can just go to Abu Dhabi. But I think we'll probably have one more of those bubble experiences at least this summertime.
And moving on with that, I would say that the UFC is maybe the sport that has handled COVID the best, with all the protocols and precautions and kicking young and up and coming fighters out for violating those things. So can you talk about how the MMA's just kind of thrived a little bit through the pandemic and some of the adjustments that you've had to make with your job specifically through COVID?
Yeah, definitely. No, it has. I think they deserve a lot of respect and appreciation for what they've done. I mean, it's been a wild ride. You know, I mean, you know, me personally, I was always of the belief that we could go on. I was one of the few even that stood in support, you know, way back in April when they were trying to do the shows out at Tachi Palace. And, you know, a lot of people were really upset about that. And I never understood it. I'm like, guys, it doesn't matter if we do this in April, May, June, July, or whatever date you want to circle on the calendar, we're going to have to follow safety protocol. So why does it matter if we do it now or we do it in May? We just got to get the safety protocol in place, and we got to do it. And I knew behind the scenes how hard everybody was working. And you know what? I think sometimes that's a fault of UFC President Dana White is that he cares so little about what people think that he doesn't take the time to explain it. Like behind the scenes, there was all this work going on But he was just like, don't worry, I got it. Don't worry, I got it. You know what I mean? And so, like, while he's right and he's accurate, like, I think he would have done himself some more favors if he would have, like, okay, well, here's our protocol. I'll bring Dr. Jeffrey Davidson here. He'll explain to you. I'll bring Jeff Nowitzki. But instead, he's just like, bro, chill. I got this, you know? So anyway, it's been interesting. You know, May, when we were the first sport back, you know, I can't tell you how many interviews I did with, you know, mainstream sports hosts and stuff that week, you know, talking about what was going on. And I think that was huge for the UFC, right? Because I talked to some of these radio hosts that were like, look, you know, before we'd go on air, they'd be like, straight up, listen, look, I want to be honest with you. I don't know a whole lot about this sport, but it's the only damn sport we got right now. So we got to talk about something, you know? And I was like, don't worry, man, I'll walk you through it. You know? So I think that was good. I think it really did, you know, kind of give, you know, a unique opportunity for them to gain fans. And they have been so careful with the way they do things, man. It has changed everything. I mean, I've been tested at this point. I think the number is 67 times at this point that I've been COVID tested.
Wow.
And
I've been once.
Yeah. Dude, it's so weird. I'm so used to getting it now that, like, when we have a week where we don't have an event and I don't get tested, it makes me feel nervous. Like, it's kind of cool. Like, I get that peace of mind, and for my family too. I get that peace of mind that, like, twice a week I'm getting tested during an event week, and it's pretty cool, you know. But it's changed everything. I mean, it's changed the way we do things. You know, I think this week we're actually going to go back to having actual in-person media days for the first time since way back in March, which I'm loving, except in Fight Island. We do it in Fight Island because we're in that bubble, but they're figuring out, you know, they've launched these virtual media days, and I appreciate the fact that they've done them because at least it gives us some access, but it's just not the same, you know what I mean? You know, like what we're doing now, web streaming, it's great, but it's not, if we could do it in person, you know what I mean? It'd be even a little bit better, right? So I'm looking forward to getting back to that, but, you know, we don't do media scrum. You know, we all used to kind of stand shoulder to shoulder and set up our tripods and do those media scrums. And now we're all at tables, you know, individual tables, individual workspace that is all spaced 6 feet apart. You know, we got to wear a mask at all times. I mean, literally they have thought about everything. You know, for me to be inside the Apex on Saturday night, I have to go to the host hotel at 6 o'clock in the morning, get a COVID test, and then stay in my room until the result of that test comes back, and then I can go over to the Apex. I mean, it's literally changed everything, but the UFC, I think, deserves a lot of credit for, and Dana too. I mean, Dana was just crazy enough and stubborn enough to be like, hey, I don't care what it takes. Let's find a way to do this. Let's make sure it's safe, and let's do it. And we've carried on and we've done it. And man, you know, it's been a blessing for us. You know, man, a lot of sports reporters lost their jobs, you know what I mean, covering beats that weren't happening, you know, and you know, we went through furloughs like every company did, you know, during the initial, you know, stages of the pandemic. But now, man, we're back and we're running, man, and it's a blessing to have a sport that's, I mean, 100% operational.
Yeah, it seems back in full swing at this point. And I know you're in Vegas, so has it been easier for you with the fights at the Apex Center? I mean, I know you're used to traveling all over the place. And
yeah, I'll tell you what, I always thought that I love traveling, and I do, you know what I mean? Like, it is fun to travel and, you know, get to see new places. But I'm telling you what, man, doing fights every single week and, like, coming home and sleeping in my own bed and being with, you know, I'm kind of liking it. I know there'll probably be a day where we start going on the road every week again, but I'm kind of cool with just doing it here in Las Vegas every week, if I'm being honest with you.
Yeah, no worries. So we got the I got to ask, we got the card coming up this Saturday, Overeem Volkov. Is there any fight on there you're most excited for?
Well, I'm definitely excited for the main event. I think it's a big one, especially because you know that Overeem is kind of nearing the end of his run, right? And you know, can he make a championship run before he calls it quits? You know, it's tough. And of course, once you get up to the top of that division, you got some absolute monsters. But I mean, he's a legend of the sport. So I'm kind of curious to see where that goes. And look, you know, in the heavyweight division, a couple of wins, you are starting to talk about title shots. There's that Frankie Edgar versus Corey Sandhagen. Tough fight for Frankie Edgar, right? But I mean, Frankie Edgar, like, true MMA legend, man. Like I always say, if you're not a fan of Frankie Edgar, like, you just don't like MMA, man. There's something wrong with you. Like, this dude is a stud. So any chance we get to see him in action is great, because he is a true legend of sport. But he's got a tough one, you know. Now he's at that point in his career where now he's facing these young up-and-comers, man, and they're absolute studs. So that should be great. But Neil Dariush versus Diego Ferreira, man, that's a kind of a little sleeper fight right there. I haven't heard a lot of people talking about that, but stylistically, that could be an absolute banger. And then you go down on the prelims. I mean, how about some OGs going at it? Clay Guida and Michael Johnson. I mean, some true OGs of the sport. Yep. So that's great. Justin James is a late addition to there. I have selfish reasons there. He coached my son in wrestling for quite some time over at Extreme Couture, but that personally appeals to me. I want to see the kid doing well. Timur Vallia is on there. I mean, look, this card this weekend, sneaky good. I think there's gonna be some really good fights on it, man. I know it's not necessarily pay-per-view level, but you're also not being asked to pay pay-per-view money either. I think there's gonna be some fun fights on there.
Yeah, it's certainly stacked. I know I'll be watching.
Yeah, for sure. And John, I know we didn't have you on here to do any consultations, but could you just give a little bit of quick advice to two 22-year-old guys trying to get into the sports writing, broadcasting, podcasting world like we are?
Yeah, no question, man. I'm happy to do it, dude. I mean, obviously, the one thing I always tell people is just grind, man. Put in that work ethic. You know what I'm saying? No matter how quality you are, there may be people that are smarter than you or whatever, but if you can outwork them, that works in your favor. You know what I mean? So put that in there, man, and just keep getting the reps, man. I always tell people, like, the more practice you can get, the better. I mean, even if you're just doing it for yourself, whatever brand of journalism is you want to do, whether you want to write, you want to be a videographer, you want to be a podcaster, you want to be whatever it is, just do it. You know what I mean? Even if nobody is watching or listening or nobody goes out there, like, just do it. Even if it's a website for yourself or whatever, it's fine, because the more practice you can get it, the more comfortable you're going to be, and you're just going to get better at your craft over time. And that only comes with repetitions, man. You do it, And then the other thing I say is to me, it's about character, man. Like, just be honest, be straight, be direct, be real. Like it's just saying things for clicks and hot takes and stuff that you don't actually believe in, I always think is crap. And also, don't ever write, say anything, put out there in the public that you wouldn't say to somebody's face. You know what I mean? Like, it's okay to criticize somebody. Like, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with looking at an athlete and be like, I just looked to me like you didn't have a backup game plan once the initial one wasn't going right. It looked to me like you faded a little bit in the third round. Maybe cardio was an issue. That's what criticism's fine. But when you see, that guy sucks, man, he has no business being there. Like, no, that guy doesn't suck. That guy's, already one of the top 1% by being there. So, stuff like that. I just think sometimes, people want to get a little snarky and say a little something for some, for some clout on social media or whatever. And it comes back to bite them in the ass later down the road. So, just think long-term about stuff like that.
I appreciate
Absolutely.
that, man. I appreciate that.
Thank you for the advice. I mean, I would say your work and your dedication is sort of the epitome of that. I mean, especially in the world of MMA, that's a good rule to follow by. Well, we appreciate you coming on, John. Thank you again so much for coming on.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it, man. Hit me up anytime. It's not hard to get me talking about MMA, that's for sure.
Definitely. We don't mind to hear. All right. Well, again, you can catch John on the MMA Roadshow, as well as read any of his articles on MMAJunkie.com. And when you're done watching a UFC event, make sure to stick around for the press conference as well. I know not many of you do. You should. You can hear his voice. You'll hear him first, most likely. You can follow him on Twitter at MMA Junkie John and on Instagram at John Morgan MMA.
Well said. Thank you, brother.
Yeah, awesome.
Thanks again, John.
No worries.
Yeah,
Good
that
stuff,
was awesome.
guys. Good stuff, guys.
That is it for our episode today. Episode 6 of Right Off the Bus in the books, Chandler. Good episode. I just want to thank John Morgan again for coming on the show. It was awesome to have him. Glad he came in to do the interview. Please remember to follow, download, subscribe, anything you can do. Maybe even leave a review. It really helps us out. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate it. And we'll catch you on the next episode. We'll see you next week for episode 7.